we're now ready to sew the lining. So I need my foam divider piece that I've cut out from piece S, and 2 of my piece B lining pieces. Okay, first I'm going to sew these lengthwise on both edges with a 5/8 seam allowance. Now I will trim these edges. And turn it right side out. And then these should be pressed or finger pressed flat. Okay, and now we will take our foam piece and insert it into here, and we want it to be centered. So I am going to center this got about 3/4 of an inch on each edge. And that looks good. Okay, when it is centered, I am going to stitch across the top and bottom about 1/4 inch from the edge to top stitch it. And I lengthened my stitch a little more than normal because I'm going through foam too. Okay, and that is my the divider on the inside. Okay, next you're going to need 2 pieces. You're going to need your gusset piece G made from your exterior. You need 2 of those, and I'm going to set that aside. And you will need to cut out your interior gusset piece F. I give a suggested place to cut it. This is so I can have room for scriptures on one side and the journal on the other. But you can cut it any place. If you don't want to cut it, then I have dimensions in the pattern that you need to cut this this piece to. Otherwise, it'll be too wide for the inside. Okay. Now I am going to take one of these wide pieces and one of the narrow pieces, and we're going to sandwich the divider between them. But before doing that, I'm going to cut off 1/4 inch from each short end of this divider. Now I'm going to sandwich this like this. It'll be in the center. And then at this end, I'm going to sandwich it as well. And I will make sure this side has the narrow one, so I will make sure to put the narrow one up here too. Okay, now I'm going to sew 1/2 inch seam allowance both of these short ends. So I am going to trim, I can either trim the whole edge, or sometimes what I like to do is top stitch just this side. And then top stitch, oops, this other side of the seam allowance down too. And that will help it lie flat for the next step when we are adding foam. So this is just optional. This is something I do sometimes. I don't think it's written in the pattern. Okay, and I'm gonna just trim this a little bit. So this is what the back side looks, and this is the front side. And now I need to just decide which is top and bottom. It doesn't really matter, but I'm gonna have this be the top. And this is where I will need those pieces I set aside. The piece G gusset borders. For this, I fold my divider over so it's kind of out of the way, and I sew this piece to the top, and we're back to a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Oops, my needle was still over. And then I'm going to do the same thing on this side. Make sure you don't catch the divider in this seam. It shouldn't be an issue if you stuck to the correct seam allowances, but just double check. these have to be top stitched with the seam going up because there's not enough room to do it, to open it up or do it down. And I will do the same thing on this side. Okay, I'm going to set this aside. And I just got my final two piece B lining pieces. And piece C side borders. And if you are doing just an open tote, then you will sew these right sides together, open it up, top stitch. If you are sewing the flap, you will do that on one side, and on the other side you will sandwich the finished flap in between these two pieces. Well, for the zipper, we have to sandwich it between both. So I'm going to put one side of the zipper flap, the bottom side of it facing the right side of the lining, and I'm going to center it here in the middle. And I'm going to take the top piece and do it right sides together with the this big rectangle. And then I like to sew things all together at once, so I'm going to do the same thing on this side. And I'm going to sew across here. Okay, and then I like to top stitch this underneath like this. So this is on the lining. This really won't be seen very much. And I will repeat that on the other side. Okay. So this is where we're at. Okay, I'm going to set that aside for the moment. You need that piece that you just sewed, these end pieces, and your very final fabric piece. It's the piece D, the lining piece. Now I chose to cut this out of the exterior just to make it extra sturdy on the inside, but it's written to use the lining fabric. This will be the bottom of the inside. Okay, and you need your foam pieces. Piece P, your foam bottom piece, which is the same size as piece D, same dimensions. You have 2 piece cues, foam sides, that you will use on these long sides. You will match it up with the bottom and the sides, and there should be ½ inch left at the top. I'll do that for both of the sides. And then you have your foam gusset piece R, and these will be matched up with the bottom and sides of these gussets, also leaving ½ inch of this fabric on top. Now you can use spray adhesive. If you have foam that has one side fusible, you can iron it on, or you can baste around the edges. And I ran out of spray adhesive, which I love using. This is not supposed to be adhesive, but I think they gave it to me on accident. But I think I'm going to baste around the edges. That's what I normally do. So I'm going to go ahead and baste around the edges of all of these, and then I'll come back. All of your pieces should now have foam on the back, with ½ inch of fabric exposed at the top for these side pieces, or the gusset pieces and the side pieces. So we're going to take these side pieces that are attached to the zipper. If it's easier to maneuver them, you can always undo the zipper. And we are going to sew both edges, both long edges, bottom edges to a long edge of the base piece. Now when I'm sewing foam, I do lengthen my stitch a little bit to make it easier to work with. And when we sew across these edges, we are using a larger seam allowance for the inside of the purse so that it fits nicely with the foam. We're going to use a 3/4 inch seam allowance. I know that probably seems giant, but it'll help everything to fit at the end. I'm going to trim each of these seams very short, to about 1/8 inch. Because foam is very bulky, so we want to trim off as much of this as possible. Okay, at this point, it's very helpful to open your zipper to get to this end piece. Okay, we're going to take our ends and fit them in here. Just like on the outside, we're going to match up the center of the gusset with the center of the bottom base piece. Then we are going to match up these top edges and clip on down from there. We're going to sew this gusset on the same way we did the inside, with one exception, and that is the seam allowance. It needs to start off the same seam allowance as the outside so that the top edges fit. So we're going to start off at the top with 1/2 inch seam allowance, and then we will quickly change it to 3/4 of an inch. So we'll start with 1/2 inch, and then as I sew, I move this gradually over so that it's at the 3/4 of an inch part. And then when I get 3/4 of an inch away from the bottom edge, pivot. Okay, pivoting again. And I'm at 3/4 of an inch seam allowance, and then as I get closer to the top, I'm gonna change back down to 1/2 inch. So by the time I'm at the top, 1/2 inch seam allowance. And then I'm gonna trim this off nice and short. And I'm left with this final end to sew on. All right. So the inside is all done. The divider should sit there nicely. There should be 2 compartments. And now we are going to put the lining into the exterior. So I just need to decide which way I want the zipper going. If this is the front of the purse, I'm going to put the inside, the lining inside the exterior, especially poking these corners. Everything should fit nicely because of the seam allowance trick we did. Okay, good. So I generally fold down the lining all the way around. Okay, I'm gonna tuck this zipper in as much as I can. Okay, there, that's easier to see. Because the foam is attached to the lining, I fold it down with the lining and I start, try to keep it 1/2 inch, and I fold it all the way around. So now I will go around again with my exterior. And I will fold it to match. I do a lot of this by looking, but if you need to use your ruler to make sure you're folding things down 1/2 inch, you can do that. You can also use double-sided adhesive to turn down these edges to keep them down. The bulkiest part is going to be at the corners. So try to make those match up. But when we sew them, we're going to have to be very careful of these corners. Then, as you can see, I'm adjusting this as I go. Oops. Adjusting this as I go because I didn't have everything quite lined up. And I just work everything in until I'm happy. And once I'm happy with how it looks, then I stitch around the outside. You can stitch like this, but I prefer to take off my arm and stitch from the outside so I can make sure I am stitching straight. Alright, I'm going to lengthen my stitch. And if you have a button to turn to make sure that your stitch, when you're not sewing, that it ends up with the needle down, that's what I prefer using at this point. Okay, and I'm going to stitch around this twice. The first time, a little over 1/8 of an inch from the edge, and then the second time I'll sew next to that. Just was very careful on the corners. And that is the final step, though I am going to sew around it one more time because I want to have a double top stitch look. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Turns out my phone ran out of battery, so here is the finished product. I top stitched around it twice because I wanted that double top stitch look. And this is the final result. Has 2 outside pockets. And it should fit her scriptures and her new scriptures here, and a little journal there. And there you go. Sweet Sunday bag.